Welcome to Ellis B. Feaster's Radio Air Check and Classic TV channel.
County. And we get this reassuring word from the Grumman Corporation. The 200 new buses being built for New York City do not have any cracks in the undercarriages, and what problem does exist can be repaired simply under the warranty. The MTA was threatening to cancel its purchase of those buses. WABC News Time, 4:59. In a moment, we'll return to Howard Hoffman and our continuing tribute to the late John Lennon. The weather person says cloudy tonight, a chance of showers into Tuesday morning, low in the mid-40s. The threat of rain Tuesday, high 45 to 50. Rain is likely Tuesday night, low 35 to 40. More rain expected Wednesday morning. It's 52 degrees at WABC New York, New York's radio station.
77 WABC, New York's radio station, John Lennon and the Beatles with 8 days a week. We're going to check in with the ABC Radio Network. They have another update on the John Lennon situation, so we're going to join them right now. Here from ABC News, Mary Margaret Myers.
John's comeback album, just released weeks ago, is called John and Yoko, Double Fantasy. His first single in years is called Starting Over. John Lennon was like most other lower middle-class kids in Liverpool, except his father left when he was 3, and his mother raised him alone. Another difference, he went to art school. In an interview for the History of Rock and Roll, Lennon talked about his education.
Junior school, grammar school, which I failed miserably, were great at art, folks. And so the headmaster recommended me to go to art school. He said, if he doesn't go there, he may as well just pack up life, pack up living, you see. So he arranged for me to go to art school, which I went to for 5 years and failed there too.
John Lennon did not fail in changing the history of music. He did not fail an entire generation. It's impossible to believe. It's almost impossible to cry. Hundreds of mourners are standing silent in the streets of New York City around the Dakota apartments where John Lennon lived and died. This has been a special report from ABC News. I'm Mary Margaret Myers, ABC News, New York.
77 WABC, New York's radio station, Nowhere Man. John Lennon and the Beatles, that's considered to be the first social consciousness song by the Beatles, the first of many from back in 1966. A couple of things were going on with John at the time. He began his solo acting career by filming the movie How I Won the War. And the Beatles did their final live concert in San Francisco in August, and in November of that year, John met Yoko at her art exhibit at the Indica Gallery. Is that how you pronounce it? Indica Gallery in London. So the rest is history. If you're just waking up, for you 5:15 wake-ups, very bad, very unfortunate situation happened last night outside of John Lennon's house. John Lennon was shot and killed by a man who they do have in custody. And we are still piecing it all together, and we will have a WABC News update at 5:25 and a report from ABC News at 5:35. The full details coming up. And the music of John Lennon will continue in just a moment.
I am the music, I am the rest. I'll be good for your sister. I am the rest. I am the music in your heart. I am the rhythm in your soul. I'll be good for your sister. I am the rest.
At Bryce Audio, you'll find a complete selection of Marantz tuners, receivers, and speakers. Bryce Audio has built a 29-year reputation of integrity, reliability, and knowledge. And at Bryce, you can see all major brands of audio and video equipment and accessories at all the best prices. All major credit cards are welcome at Bryce, 115 West 40th Street in Manhattan. Call 212-575-8600. And remember, it's Marantz for quality, and it's Bryce for price.
I'll be good for your sister. I am right.
Is directed. It's going to be cloudy today with a chance of showers this morning with a low, low was already hit. Chance of rain developing during the day today with a high 45 to 50. Periods of rain likely tonight and Wednesday morning. Low tonight 35 to 40. Partial clearing will happen tomorrow afternoon with a high 40 to 45. It's cloudy. It really got cold. 47 degrees in New York at 77 WABC, New York's radio station, the station that was there when the Beatles happened. And unfortunately, John Lennon no longer with us now. We're remembering him through his music. And back in 1970, that was a big year for not a very good year for Beatle fans. That was when the Beatles officially broke up. They released Let It Be, and all four Beatles decided to release solo albums. This was John Lennon's first solo effort. He got the idea in the morning, brought in George Harrison into the studio. He produced it, wrote it, performed it. It was finished by that afternoon, and in 1 week, the record was out. Here's Instant Karma from 77 WABC. 77 WABC, New York's radio station, A Hard Day's Night, a song which was prompted by a thought which was just blurted out by Ringo one night. Came in and he said, "It's a hard day's night." John and Paul picked right up on it, wrote a song about it. I think that's something just amazing what inspires records, what inspires people to write songs. John Lennon, we're remembering him right here on 77 WABC. It's 5:25 in the morning, and let's check in with John Maher in a WABC News Update.
Good morning, Howard. As you said, John Lennon is dead. The 40-year-old former leader of the Beatles shot to death outside his apartment house, the Dakota, on 72nd Street in Central Park West. A suspect is in custody. WABC's Gus Engelman has the whole story chronologically.
He's been identified as Mark David Chapman of 55 South Kukui Street in Hawaii. He is 25 years of age, 5'11", 195 pounds. According to Chief Sullivan, he arrived in New York City about a week ago. He stayed at several YMCAs, no exact locations. Then he checked into the Sheraton Center. From there, his activities are like this, according to Chief Sullivan. Over the weekend, both days, on Saturday and Sunday, he was hanging around the Dakota and asking questions about Lennon, of the employees around the Dakota. According to Chief Sullivan, this is not too unusual because a lot of people have been hanging around the Dakota, after all, John Lennon was a celebrity. According to Chief Sullivan, the suspect then returned today, and he hung around the apartment building all day long, and around 5 p.m., when John Lennon left the building, accompanied by his wife Yoko, to go to a recording session, the suspect stopped Lennon and got an autograph. This was around 5 p.m. And then he stayed around the building for the rest of the evening. Then John Lennon returned from the recording session shortly before 11 p.m. He parked his car at the curb rather than in the driveway. He got out of his car, accompanied by Yoko, and walked into the archway, through the gates there into the archway, where to the right is a vestibule where the management's office is. According to Chief Sullivan, the suspect then came up from behind, just yelled out, "Mr. Lennon," and then, according to Chief Sullivan, using a combat stance, he then proceeded to empty a .38 caliber revolver. Lennon's only words, according to Chief Sullivan, was, "I'm shot, I'm shot." He then staggered up 6 steps into the management's office there and collapsed in the office. Then the radio calls were dispatched. Police came to the scene, and that's when Lennon was placed in a radio car and taken to Lenox Hill Roosevelt Hospital, where he was DOA.
Yoko Ono, Lennon's wife, described as hysterical after being told her husband John Lennon had died. Once again, the suspect in custody is 25-year-old Mark David Chapman of Hawaii. Chief of Detective John Sullivan says police are inspecting Chapman's room at the Sheraton Center. Sullivan refused to speculate on the motive for the shooting of John Lennon or on whether Chapman has a history of mental illness or a military record. WABC News Time 5:27, 47 degrees cloudy in New York. WABC's Kathleen Maloney will be here to tell us in a moment how fans are reacting.
Suppose you wanted to find some good, solid information about birth control or WABC, New York's radio station, for a more informed community.
Next, with the reaction of fans to the murder of John Lennon, here's WABC's Kathleen Maloney.
Well, John, you know, my own reaction is probably typical of many. When I heard the news of Lennon's death and how it happened, first disbelief, then an empty, sick feeling in my stomach. It's the kind of feeling I had when President John Kennedy was shot. There's an emotional scene outside the Dakota on West 72nd Street where John lived with his wife Yoko Ono and where he was gunned down. Tearful women and men huddled together listening to transistor radios, getting all the details of the shooting and being soothed by Beatles songs. At times they sing, using the words of Lennon's first single release, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." That song was recorded in a hotel room in Canada during a marathon bed-in John and Yoko were staging for the cause of peace. Lennon always was outspoken. He was unconventional and certainly controversial, but very much loved. It's still hard to accept what's happened. John?
Thank you, Kathy. On the WABC scoreboard, nothing local to report. In Monday Night Football, the Miami Dolphins upset the New England Patriots in overtime 16-13. Here's the WABC weather report. Mostly cloudy today with a chance of rain toward evening, the high around 50. Periods of rain likely tonight, possibly mixed with snow before ending tomorrow morning. Low this evening, 30 to 35. Partial clearing, turning colder tomorrow afternoon with a high near 40. It's 47 degrees at WABC New York, New York's radio station.
Okay, thank you, John. It's 5:30 in the morning, and for those of you who are just waking up at 5:30, hate to wake you with the news that John Lennon has been shot and killed. It happened about 11 o'clock last night, and we'll bring you updates all morning long as time goes on with John Maher and ABC News, and we'll be having an ABC News update coming up in about 5 minutes from right now, so stay tuned for it. We're going to go back to 1974 right now. This is the time when John Lennon separated from Yoko Ono. During a little time of crisis in their lives. It prompted him to write this song from his album Walls and Bridges, and I think it applies to all of us who will always remember John Lennon. You don't know what you got till you lose it.
This is a special report from ABC News. I'm Mary Margaret Myers. John Lennon, the early years. Why the Beatles?
It just started about 3 years ago in Liverpool, and we Beatled about, and then we went to Hamburg and Beatled, then we came back to Liverpool and Beatled, then we went to Hamburg and Beatled, then we came back to Liverpool and Beatled, and then we made a record. Why Beatle? Why not a rose by any other name would smell as Beatle?
John Lennon on the early years, back in the mid-60s, for the history of rock and roll. John Lennon's life ended last night. With us in the studio is Jimmy Fink of WPLJ Radio here in New York. Jimmy, it's hard to believe. The song A Day in a Life, I understand Paul wrote that, but he had some problems with it.
It's actually a Paul McCartney song, which Paul had been having trouble with. And as in many occasions, Paul would call on John to ask for his help in writing the song. And actually, John was the one who came in and completed that particular song. And it, in fact, contributed a lot to the Paul is dead rumors back around the time that it came out.
John Lennon was shot and killed here in New York City last night for no apparent reason by a man who was seen hanging around his luxury apartment building for a couple of hours, maybe a couple of days. Lennon reportedly gave his autograph to the man earlier in the day. We talked with a close friend of John Lennon, a traveling companion, May Pang.
John was a loving man. He loved people, and especially he loved his music. He always advocated peace. And it just seems as though this was all senseless. A man who wanted peace all the time.
May Pang heard the news of Lennon's death and was stunned, as were we all.
I was sitting with a friend, and we were just going through some things, helping her unpack, when I heard it on the radio. At first I thought it was a joke. Turned on the radio even louder, and my fears started to really get the better of me. And finally I started making calls, and I found out it was real. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it.
Nobody could believe it. Jimmy?
That's the truth. Immediately after hearing the news, I went to Roosevelt Hospital, where the news had reported that John was taken. And I could tell you there were 500 people there who couldn't believe it. 500 people standing in total silence. A couple of them actually kneeling and praying for the life of John Lennon. This was actually before the official announcement had been made that he was, in fact, dead on arrival at the hospital. When that announcement was made, certainly a hush went over the crowd, and it was a very short news conference, not too many questions asked. The information that John Lennon was dead was...
There's not much you can say to that. After that, you went to the Dakota.
After that, I headed over to the Dakota, which is an apartment complex where John Lennon was in front of his hotel, also virtually in total silence, certainly not the average rock and roll crowd, at least certainly not in a rock and roll spirit tonight.
I think very few people are able to cry. You can't.
It's a matter of being stunned and not really being able to cry and not being able to understand why this happened. I believe, as May Pang said to us at a different time, something we didn't play on the air for you, hoping that there would be a reason or that something good may possibly come of this.
It's been a long road.
It's been a long road, is the truth. A Paul McCartney song, actually a Paul McCartney song now coming for you for John Lennon, whose long and winding road has in fact come to an end.
The long and winding road.
This has been a special report on the death of John Lennon. With WPLJ disc jockey Jimmy Fink, I'm Mary Margaret Myers, ABC News.